Folks, I love this book, and I am very proud to introduce you to author Fawn Brokaw Doyle, Salt People of the Cloud Houses. First time author, definitely not the last time. Here we go. Check it out. Tell us who Sarah Rapalje was.
So Sarah was the first child of European heritage that was born in New Netherland, which is now New York State. She was born in what's now Albany, New York, but at the time was Fort Orange, the first settlement it was settled by Walloons by the Dutch West India Company.
So, some people know exactly what you're talking about, and others maybe not so much, and others maybe not at all. So, okay, what was a Walloon, first of all?
Walloons were French-speaking Protestants that fled the Spanish Netherlands at the time. So currently, that's parts of France and Belgium. But back then, it was part of the Habsburg Empire, ruled by the Spanish, who were Catholic. So the Walloons, there was an exodus in the 16th century into the 17th. And many of them fled to Amsterdam and Leiden and cities that accepted them in the Netherlands.
When I say this is our lost American history, this is part of exactly what I'm talking about. Because when you say to people, what's the real, if you break down what's the history of America, why did people come here in the first place? There's a very specific reason, and it's what you just talked about. It was Protestants escaping oppression by Roman Catholics, right?
Yeah,
And in saying that,
yeah,
I'm not
that
taking
was the
sides.
Walloons
My family heritage is Roman Catholic, but it's a fact. That's the only reason Europeans came here originally, right?
originally.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think Virginia was maybe more of an economic reason, but New England and New Netherland were settled by Protestants who were searching for their own homeland to create.
Right. So for context, let's address those three areas because those were the first three areas that Europeans occupied, as far as we know, and I think we know it because they were very good about documenting these voyages. So Virginia started around 1605, and that was expressly a commercial venture by the English
Mhm.
to occupy and take land and cultivate tobacco. And at first, I think they thought there might be gold there, and then they figured out there wasn't. And then they did what they could do to try to derive income out of it, but it was an abject failure. The Jamestown venture and the James River and all that, it didn't work. So that wasn't really a colony; it was just a bad business attempt. The Puritan settlement, the Mayflower Pilgrims, landed in
Mhm.
1620 in the area of Cape Cod, Plymouth, Mass. And that was a Puritan sect, but they were Calvinists. They were Reformed Protestants, right?
Yeah. Yep. So similar to the Dutch settlers that they came in 1624. So similar reasons, and also, there was an economic commercial aspect to it as well. That they, well, for the Dutch, that was centered on the fur trade that of the Hudson Valley, and that was basically they were sending settlers over to establish and maintain their control of the fur trade.
Right. Which brings up another group that we should have mentioned which is the French, and they had created a very vibrant fur trade based essentially out of what we call Quebec, Canada today. And that was the other major faction in North America. And this was why New Netherland, centered at the tip of Manhattan Island, was so special because when the French settled there, started developing and expanding their fur trade up in Canada, and the English established their fledgling colony in Plymouth, Mass. they didn't know there was this much land between there and the Jamestown venture. They weren't sure because no one had really charted this land. So they were kind of thinking it was a lot closer. They didn't think there were hundreds and hundreds of miles between, several hundred miles between, Cape Cod and Jamestown, Virginia. So that's part of the reason why when the Dutch West India Company got wind of this tract of land, that they wanted to go after it. And they found that the fur trade down here was perhaps even more had perhaps even more potential than it did up in Canada.
Right, yeah. So New Netherland stretched from um, like the uh, Delaware Bay area. So today's states, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, parts of Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and New York State. So it was a good chunk of the mid-Atlantic
It's really amazing. You mentioned Rhode Island. I don't generally think of Rhode Island, but you're right. That was part of New Netherland as well. In fact,
originally.
yeah, in fact, that was the 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 let's say the northeastern reach of the Adrian Block radius. He discovered the true significance of wampum to the Native American tribes and how critical and how central it was to negotiations with those tribes.
Right. Yeah, they used it in every transaction to it was basically a way of keeping a record and establishing like a reciprocal trade.
So let me introduce you, Fawn, because I haven't done that yet. Folks, my guest today is Fawn Brokaw Doyle, who has written a book about an ancestor of hers by the name of Sarah Rapalje, an ancestor who just happens to have been the first child of European descent to be born within this colony of New Netherland. Bienvenue, mademoiselle.
My
Um,
chance.
Hello
Thanks
again.
for having me.
Thank you for being here a couple of times and sticking with it.
I'm I'm always happy to talk about history.
Yeah, Fawn and I are bona fide historical geeks, particularly focused on the incredible history of Manhattan Island. And I really want to thank you for not just writing the book, but for the dedication you put into writing this book. It's clearly evident, and it reminded me just how special and how important this story is, this history is, and how important it is to me. Um, did you ever see the thing they call the time landscape in New York, in Manhattan, down in the Village?
I don't think so. The time
Okay,
landscape?
this is how I got interested in all of this stuff when I was at NYU. It's down south. If you know what LaGuardia Place is.
Hmm.
All right. So if you're at Washington Square Park and you go south on LaGuardia down to Houston, basically, there's this little rectangle and they call it the time landscape. That's what the artist called it. It was done by an artist named Alan Sunfist, I think is his name, back in the 60s. And it recreates to the best of their ability in a small section of a block the vegetation and the growth, the forest growth that they suggest was here before the Europeans got here, when it was only Native Americans and mostly unsettled land. And I was in my I was probably 20 years old and I saw it, and like I knew historically that there were Native Americans here first, but I never really thought about it, and it was just something about that display and looking into it, like you're just looking into the woods, and that idea of, wow, this really was woods at one point, and people had to come here, and it was a pioneer territory. It was a real story of true settling unsettled lands, and anyway, that was what started me that's what sparked my interest in this story. And then from there, it was years and years and decades of learning about it and reading about it. And it got, to me, it got more compelling as I went along. But it's a, there's a fascination to it. You know, if you get that passion for it, it hooks you. And my point is, you've got it. Clearly, you have it too. And it's evident when I read this book that you share this passion for this almost like majestic quality about this story.
Yeah, it is such a dramatic difference thinking of what it was in the 1600s and what it is today. And I grew up in New York State, not in New York City, but I learned New York history, and that was part of what really fascinated me when I found out about New Netherland was that it wasn't something I learned in school. And we learned about the fur trade, and that was about it. But I didn't know there was a Dutch colony, Dutch settlers, and that it was such a multicultural colony, and that was at the foundation of New York City. And it is fascinating how much carried through 400 years.
Don't you wish they taught it a little better? Doesn't it seem like, especially from someone who's not from New York, but from New York State, from upstate, don't you wish they
Hmm.
taught this story a little bit better? Like this is, it's why I say it's our lost American history, because they just don't focus on it in any level of our, K through 12. They may mention Peter Stuyvesant in passing, but this is where it all started. And the English stole the colony in 1664, right out from under them, and kept, in a very un-English fashion, kept the Dutchness of this place very much in place by design, because they were so impressed with the little city that the Dutch had created here over
Yeah.
just about 40 years. That's it.
Yeah. I think the scale of that time, 40 years over 400 is partially why that history is lost, but it's still, such a core part of its foundation. And it's also the case of the victors of history, right? Get to choose what to focus their history on. So there was that part of it. And then also that the records that we have from that time period were in Dutch. And only in the past 50 years have Charles Gehring and others at the New Netherland Institute tackled that translation. So it's only in the, recent history that we've even been able to appreciate how much the Dutch started in the city that would become New York.
Yeah, and there had been earlier translations of some of these documents, and you know, there's some art, there's some science to it. There's also some art to it. And as Charlie will tell you, and I just talked to him in an interview about this specific thing, is that you have to kind of like use your knowledge and insight a lot of the way on determining what they actually meant. So it's not just necessarily translating the words, but translating what they're talking about and what they meant. And sometimes you need to use different words to express that. And that a lot of some of the earlier translations got lost in that quandary, in that kind of problem. And I would say that, though I'm a little biased, that Charlie has provided us with some of the probably the most accurate translations that we have. Thank God. God
Yeah.
bless that man.
I love reading those translations. It's such a fascinating window into that history, and like it feels like time travel.
Well,
Just,
yeah, that's because Charlie's one of us,
yeah.
or we're one of
He
him.
under he understands, yeah, he understands the culture and interest in it today, and he understands the culture and context of 17th century Dutch.
Yeah, and he still loves it. Like, you talk to him, and he's not a kid, and he becomes like a little kid when he starts talking about it again. I mean, he just bubbles up. It's just really awesome. I love it.
Mhm.
I love it. So awesome. So, because you did that research and And the way you wrote this story, it really it just drew me in. And you depict the you know this the fabric of life on Manhattan Island when it was an unfettered wilderness before anything was developed. And then you take us over across the river to what we now call basically the Brooklyn Navy Yard and Fort Greene and Brooklyn. But what were they even calling it then when Sarah's parents moved over there?
So that they called it Long Island, which it comes from a Dutch version of that, which was Lang Island.
Yeah, which by the way, Adrian Block invented as well.
Yeah, right. A lot of the names we're familiar with came from this period. And Brooklyn was a town, not a borough at that
Mhm.
point.
Right.
It was basically at the point where there was a ferry that went across to Manhattan. So then just north of there at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, it was called the Wallabocht or the Walloons Bay. And that's where Sarah's parents and her family settled. And it was basically farmland, um, much more agrarian, and the land was a lot better for farming than Lower Manhattan. So that was why they chose to settle out that way after about the 1650s.
And you said it was called Wallabout Bay. Wallabout Bay, Walloon Bay is what it meant.
Yeah,
And this was Sarah's family. They were the Walloons that lived there.
right.
To this
Yeah,
day, that's what that body of water that feeds into the Navy Yard is called.
yeah, that's amazing.
It is incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the Brooklyn Navy Hospital is where it's kind of speculative, but that's about where Sarah's parents' home would have been.
Being in like Sarah's house in the book, I felt like I felt sort of like I was at a family reunion of sorts and like kind of like liking it, not, not like didn't want to be there, and it's kind of like you hear you listen to like the banter and in within the family and you get to know them that way. And it was really effective in the way you developed the characters of this story. And you went into deep detail, and it was just it really pulled me in, and it was fun reading it. It was fun reading it the way it was fun reading like Russell Shorto's Bob at the Center of the World. I mean, a great book. Just there was like you really know it. You really know this history, and you know the heritage, and by the way, this is your family way back.
Right.
Some real
Yeah.
real ties to this.
Yeah. Sarah and several of the other main characters are uh, my ancestors, and that's kind of how I built out the story was reading the records, seeing where things kind of intersected, proximities, who's marrying whose children off to who, and how they became interconnected. And the in Russell Shorto's recent book, Taking Manhattan, he talks about imagining the Rapalje households like a Jan Steen painting, which is kind of, a chaotic but fun like interior scene. And that's totally how I imagined it too. And, with historical fiction, I could really bring that to life.
Now, let me point out that in the inside, just inside the cover, you make a note here. You make a point of saying in fine print that I can barely read, but it says this book is a work of fiction. That the story draws on real people and events found in historical records, but the characters and plot are the products of the author's imagination. Now, truth be told, that's not entirely true because the characters, almost every one of them, there may be one or two you slip in there for purpose of keeping this story going, but almost every character in here is fully documentable, historical, and has a real place in this history. So too does the plot, essentially. I mean, you didn't make up that starting in 1623 and 1624, Reformed Protestants, in order to escape the oppression of the Holy Roman Empire, came here upon an agreement with the Dutch West India Company, and that Sarah's teenage parents only agreed to get on that company ship if they married the two of them in Amsterdam prior to pushing off. I mean, this is not made up. This is all
Yeah.
true.
I'm lucky there is quite a bit of documentation, like little snippets of yeah, glimpses into their life through court records or marriages and things like that, So I had a solid backbone of truth to go off of, and then kind of bridged the gaps with the fiction.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I point this out firstly to let people know how good the book is, but also I know firsthand because there's no more fiction in this book than is in our podcast, for example, our podcast Island. It's an historical podcast that we have to fill in gaps in order to keep the story going. In order to tell any story, beginning, middle, and end, whether it's spoken or written or visual, you always have to fill in gaps, or else the story's not going to make entirely a whole lot of sense. So it just occurred to me that that's all you're doing here. And when, I've read historical fiction, and I've read historical fiction about this subject matter, and it's real fiction. They they write fiction. They make stuff up that just never happened. I didn't
Yeah.
see any instance where I could say, Fawn, there's no way they were eating that at that time, because they probably were eating that around that time. I mean, what else were they gonna eat? Like, but
Yeah. I did a lot of research on the minutia
and
of
it
living there.
yep, and it came through very, very clearly. Um,
Thank you.
and the title is beautiful. The title pertains to a really important element of this story, and that's the story of the interaction, the relationship between the indigenous peoples, the Native Americans, mostly Algonquin at this point, and the Europeans. Um, and that relationship is much more complicated, I think, than people ever want to realize. Um, tell us about that.
The title came from uh, so the word that the native Lenape people and Algonquian in the area used for the Europeans was Swanaken, which meant salt people for their pale skin, and that they came from, the across the ocean, and the cloud houses were what they called their ships because they looked like long houses with billowing sails as clouds. There's so many cultures combining in this area at the time that the cultural identity was hard to come up with. Like Sarah is a French speaking Walloon. She was living in a Dutch colony. When she grew up, it was mostly Native Americans more than Europeans in that area. She marries a Norwegian and she then marries a Dutch Netherlander. So salt people, the cloud houses, kind of was a term that combined the cultural identities, but also, acknowledges that there were people here before the Dutch West India Company, attempted to colonize it.
The title itself, Salt People of the Cloud Houses, tells a story unto itself. Within itself, it tells a story of this is one culture viewing another culture vastly different, both of them, both bringing very different things to the table, but both bringing things that the other side doesn't have. And that is largely what was going on down here. And
Yeah.
if not for Kieft's War, which, by the way, you also chronicle really, really well. Not a lot of people have done that. if not for that, during this particular era in the 1630s and 40s, it would have been a remarkably harmonious time.
Yeah, it is really interesting to think about, if history had gone slightly differently, because in the beginning they had reciprocal free trade and between the Native Americans and the settlers, and for the first 15 years or so, it was mutually beneficial. But yeah, things end up going a little differently. And there were colonists that held certain views about Native Americans, and there was competing views. There wasn't one side that everybody thought they should dominate the native culture or whatever. There was people who were on both sides. So, and Native Americans, some tribes were more aggressive than others. So yeah, it's a complicated history, and there's not a ton of documentation about it, but I tried to present it in you know, a fairly balanced way.
Well, you did a remarkable job, Fawn. Folks, if you've ever wondered about what this place was like before it became the greatest city on earth, if you've ever wondered about its most embryonic stages of this place, then this book is for you. Trust me when I tell you that the author reserves a fierce commitment to the historical material. She really knows her stuff. But blend into that her remarkable talent for composing a story from the written word. This first-time author is touched with that hallowed gift of being able to make those words into music, to make them beautiful, to reside over a composition of a great orchestral event of sorts, the Song of New Netherland. Mevrouw Brokaw Doyle is the Scout Fiscal of this realm of historical fiction. I hereby anoint her our provincial secretary of that realm.
Thank you, Chance.
You're welcome. This is an author of great integrity and prowess, and her name is Fawn Brokaw Doyle, and her book is The Salt People of the Cloud Houses, which will be available June 9th, 2025, which will mark Sarah Rapalje's 400th birthday, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's quite a way to celebrate. I hope to make Sarah proud.
I think you already have. Dankjewel, mevrouw. Merci. Congratulations on a remarkable job, and we wish you all the
Thank
best
you.
with the book.
Thank you. I just want to say, if people want to learn more about the research and history, they can visit my website, fawnbrokawdoyle.com. I posted, there's a blog about more that goes more into the research, some things that didn't quite make it into the story, but we're part of the process. And my book it'll be listed everywhere that you could buy it. Will be also listed on my website. So I think that's it.
Kortadaan, Jongadam, Kortadaan, mevrouw. Thank you so much. Great to see you, Fawn. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Chance.
Salt People of the Cloud Houses is available through Fawn's website, fawnbrokawdoyle.com, fawnbrokawdoyle.com. Thank you for joining us on YouTube. Please be sure to hit the subscribe button to get every episode, because, hey man, history's cool. Island and History is Cool are podcasts by Chance Kelly and Dr. Yap Jacobs, and are available on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Climb aboard. History's cool.